I've got The Post, starring Meryl Streep, Tom Hanks, Sarah Paulson, Bob Odenkirk, and the list of people it stars goes on, and it's directed by someone you may have heard of named Steven Spielberg. And it's about the publishing of the Pentagon Papers by the Washington Post, which at the time had the first female publisher of an American newspaper in Katharine Graham, who's played by Meryl Streep. And this film is pretty timely, it feels. They were facing a president at the time, Nixon, who tried to censor the press. Does that sound familiar? A slightly unstable, maybe neurotic, very paranoid president who did some illegal things. Again, sound familiar? I'm not getting political with this. What? So the Pentagon Papers spanned several decades and several administrations, so it wasn't just about Nixon, but it's about the cover-up of basically the government knowing that we couldn't win the Vietnam War and still doing it because they didn't want the U.S. to be perceived as losing a war. And so the Washington Post, the New York Times and the Washington Post decided to publish these papers in spite of basically like a restraining order on them. So what I think is interesting is this film was written in 2016 by a woman named Liz Hannah, who was 31 or 32 now, so good for her. And it's a spec script, which means you're trying to get an agent out of it. You're not necessarily being like, I want this movie made. Yeah. You're like, hey, like, look what I can do as a writer. That doesn't mean this film should be, like, made. And then Amy Pascal snapped up the rights in October of 2016, so before the election. So this film could have gone one of two ways, right? It's about the first female publisher of a major newspaper. So I think when she snapped up the rights, they thought this was going to be about a female leader. Mm-hmm. And so you've got Meryl Streep, and, you know, it's like perfect timing. And what it ended up being is a film about a crazy time between the government and the freedom of the press, and a government that, like, you know, was hiding things and this and that. And so I don't know. There was no way for them to know, but unfortunately now it parallels with this corrupt and insane government, and it's very timely in that sense. And so it went to production in early 2017, and Steven Spielberg, you know, directed it. So they, I think, had some inkling of, like, where the current day was going, and so like it's a little on the nose because of that. Like, I think they're really, there are a lot of parallels naturally, but they're like really pushing some of the scenes that it's like, yeah, okay, you could have made this about 2017 and it would have been just as accurate. So I found that, like, actually a little not subtle, and I expected kind of more out of Steven Spielberg. And then I was like, oh, okay, I hear this is another newspaper story. It's going to be the Steven Spielberg's version of Spotlight, you know, because we had Spotlight a few years ago, and it's kind of in vogue to do these newspaper stories. And then I found out that they brought in Josh Singer, the screenwriter who won the Oscar for Spotlight, to help, like, tidy up the script. I was like, oh my goodness. Are there no original ideas in Hollywood anymore? Like, can we only make these types of films? And it's a fine film. All of the talent are, you know, pretty much legendary. So even when they decide to kind of phone it in sometimes, it's still a decent movie, right? Like, it's still going to be a good movie. But my problem is, no matter what, like, I feel like this movie is about Meryl Streep's character, Katharine Graham, and it's a movie where she's surrounded by men, and the movie is written by a man and a woman, but it's like clearly there are scenes where there's like a male influence, and it just was like, it was messy. It was like a hodgepodge, and I really wanted to be about her, even if it's about her and the administration and her and the freedom of the press. Like, I was like, this is her story. Mm-hmm. It's also the other people's story, but, like, ultimately they were like hints of it being her story, and then they kept shying away from that because, like, oh, we gotta have Tom Hanks do this, we gotta have Bob Odenkirk do this. I was like, this is messy filmmaking, and it also wasn't, like, super revolutionary, right? It's like, okay, it starts with soldiers in Vietnam. This could have been a shot from Saving Private Ryan or any of Steven Spielberg's other 20 million war films. I'm just like, where's the originality in this? And I think the originality was in the content and, like, her story. And they kept, there were hints of it, and they'd shy away from it. And there were hints of it, and they'd shy away from it. Like, 3/4 of the way through, there's this scene where Sarah Paulson plays Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks is the editor of the paper, and he's like, we should do this. And Sarah Paulson plays his wife, and she talks about how Katharine Graham, the Meryl Streep character, has the most to lose because of all these reasons. I was like, yes, this scene is written by a woman. Like, this scene has clearly been written by a woman. And I didn't know who wrote it at the time. Yeah. And then it went immediately, like, in a split second, there wasn't even a good editing beat. Went back to, like, oh, we got to show Tom Hanks doing all this stuff. And I was like, man, this film had so much potential in these parts to be an amazing film, like a legendary film, and instead it ended up being a good award season. Hey, please give us all the things, you know, and it got nominated for a bunch of Golden Globes, yay, which, yeah, I feel like Meryl Streep could sneeze and she would get nominated for something, so it's fine. But I'm just a little frustrated. I think this entire award season and entire last year, like, my big takeaway is I really want to see more films by women and minorities, because this whole, like, whiny white man thing is so played out. There's only so much we can see from it. I think we've seen the entire gamut of those emotions and stories, and I'm over it. And even this movie, which should be about a strong female character ended up being more about the men than it was about the women. So it's very much Oscar bait, but the Golden Globes are this weekend. It's up for 6, and I'll be surprised if it doesn't get some, which I don't think is a good thing. Like, I really don't think that's a good thing. I would like to see maybe like Liz Hannah, the original screenwriter, honored, but aside from that, I'm like, we should stop rewarding veteran artists that are good but aren't pushing themselves, and instead reward these like newer and impressive diverse talent from this year. Because I think we saw a lot of films that came from an okay number of films that came from like women or minorities and stuff like that. But if we continue to just be like, oh, Meryl Streep's in something, here's an award, no new talent is going to arise. So it's good. It's not great. I'm going to give it 3.8 out of 5.
Okay, that's not bad. And again, it's called The Post.
The Post, yes, after the Washington Post.
Fantastic. And you do have the Tonya Harding movie.
Yes.
Okay, I love Margot Robbie.
Yes.
And I want to hate this movie because I hate Tonya Harding. So what was your thoughts on this film?
I think this movie will make you hate Tonya Harding less.
Oh.
Yes. It's based on Tonya Harding's life, and Margot Robbie is Harding, and then Allison Janney is her horrible, very cruel mother, and Sebastian Stan plays Jeff Gillooly, which is the
Best name. I love it.
Best name, who is
Gillooly.
her husband and then her ex-husband. And so I didn't know a ton about Tonya Harding, except for, of course, the story of her and Nancy Kerrigan. Like, I knew that part in 1994, like, why my knee?
Yeah.
She doesn't say my knee, but, But I know plenty of people who are, like, obsessed with this story. I've watched, like, the 30 for 30 of it, like, a million times. And so I just kind of knew the baseline of it. And I think that Margot Robbie was really great as Tonya. She plays her from, like, the age of 16 onwards, or, like, 15. Which is a little weird because Margot Robbie's like very much a woman, right? She's like she's tall, she's like, athletic in this, and I'm like, you're not 16, but okay, I'll buy. You know what? I get it. We're going with it. It's fine. And this film surprised me. It's like really rated R because it is really filthy language.
Oh, yes.
And I didn't realize how much abuse Tonya Harding endured from her mother and then from her husband. And she basically came from nothing and was kind of like white trashy a little bit. And, it's tough. It's hard to watch. And you feel for her in those moments. You're like, oh, wow, like you weren't just this glamorous figure skater. You worked really hard at this, and you kept missing opportunities because the skating world, you didn't represent what they wanted. And so she'd compete, probably be the best, and they'd be, she'd be in like a ghetto homemade outfit, and they'd be like, points off or something, presentation and this and that. So I was like, okay, that sucks. It sucks to be the best at what you do, and because of your background or the perception of you that you aren't being rewarded. Like, shouldn't the work or your skating speak for itself?
That's America, buddy.
Apparently. I'm like, we should change that. So I was like, you feel sympathetic, and you're like, oh man. And she's also crazy. She's definitely crazy. She's intense, and it's interesting. It's told in this like flashback style, so they're all in these very 80s like documentary style, like sitting in their living room talking to the camera, and then it'll show like the more cinematic flashbacks of it. But it's like shot on VHS looking, and I was like, oh, it's funny. And hearing their characters' perceptions of what happened and their like subjectivity of like this recounting is very funny and interesting. So it's interesting. It's unique. I didn't realize that she was such a good athlete. And then of course though, what we all really want to see is the sort of scandal. Yeah, the attack, the scandal, and how like they went into it. And it's because it's sort of a he said, she said, they're all being like, no, I didn't know this, or like, oh, well, Jeff did this on his own. And then there's also this like absolutely crazy character who I didn't know about, who is their like Jeff's friend, who's like, yeah, I'm a secret agent. No, I'm a spy. I have a network of spies, and like basically helped execute this attack, but isn't a secret. He's just like some random fat white hick, So I was like, who are you? Like, I'm sure he got press coverage at the time, but like, I think he's kind of fallen away in the story.
Was he the bodyguard, quote unquote?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, yeah. He had that sick tracksuit, man.
Yes, yeah. So it's very weird. It's like, it's interesting to see now. It's funny because we're in an Olympics year, and I'm like, oh man, like you don't see that sort of rivalry and scandal anymore. You just sort of see like, I couldn't tell you who's skating this year in the Olympics, and it doesn't, I'm sure they're great, but these two have become legends because of this scandal. So it does definitely cover that. Allison Janney is amazing in this. She's like messed up, but she's like the worst Mother of the Year award goes to whatever Harding, it's
Mrs. Harding.
Yeah, Mama Harding is like a horrible human being, and Allison Janney's such a great actress, and you're just like, oh, I hate you. Yeah, this is good. I want to hate you, and that was my problem with like Tom Hanks in The Post, where I was like, you're just Tom Hanks. Like even though you're trying to be like more crass than you usually are, like you are still kind of likable because you're Tom Hanks. Versus Allison Janney was like, oh, I hate you right now. Like you are a bad person.
Is there any clarification without giving it away? if Tonya knew it was going to happen.
Come on.
At all. Like, do
Come
they touch
on.
upon
I
it
think
at
you
all?
will have more clarity coming out of this than you did going into it. And
Okay.
I have to say, apparently there's like an ABC special with Margot
Yeah.
Robbie and Tonya Harding, like post this movie. I think it might either just came out or is coming out. And I was like, I need to see this because they like address it. And Tonya just like doesn't give a damn. I'm like, oh, good for you a little bit. But also maybe like don't destroy people's careers or try to destroy people's careers and needs for your own sake.
And
So-
be a little sympathetic, even if she had nothing to do with it. Be sympathetic to her friend that got beat up right before the Olympics.
Yes.
Which is fact.
Yeah.
No
but-
matter what, we know that's fact.
But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, man, when you're competing on that level, like, you have to be a little cold. Like, a little bit of you has to be like,
For sure.
thank goodness. Like, oh, I'm so
Yeah.
happy. You know, I don't know. That's maybe I'm a horrible person, but I felt it was an interesting perspective. I think it's definitely humanizes her. I think it gives more depth into it. Again, it's still very subjective though, because it's all, fictionalization of a real event. But it was interesting. I really enjoyed the performances, so I'm gonna give it 4.1 out of 5.
wow, there you
Oh,
go. And it's
damn.
called
I,
Tonya.
Tonya, yes.
It's the story of Tonya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan. Is Nancy in the film, by the way? They show her, right?
They show very briefly because it's about
Okay.
Tonya. So
Yeah.
I think if they wanted it to be about the two of them, it would have been like Nancy and Tonya, the story. But it's very much about Tonya Harding's perspective of it. So you see like the back of Nancy's head and like, you see her gripping a knee, but you don't see like an actress's. I don't think you do. I have to remember now. But it's very much Tonya Harding.